In the bustling heart of Beijing, where busy roads converge and the lights of the modern city dance, a silent wall once stood, bearing witness to a unique chapter in Chinese history. It was not merely a wall of dull grey bricks. It transformed into a vibrant platform for suppressed hopes, a resounding voice for long-awaited freedom. This was the Democracy Wall, a phenomenon that emerged in late 1978, marking a brief yet profoundly impactful moment in China's journey towards modernization. This wall embodied the awakening of a people yearning to break free from the heavy shackles of the past, and an overwhelming desire to build a future founded on new principles of transparency and genuine participation. That period, known as the Beijing Spring, was a rare moment of political openness, where thousands of Chinese, from workers and students to intellectuals, dared to express their bold ideas and demands, unaware that this spring would soon turn into a harsh winter, breathing its last under the weight of suppression. This is the story of the Democracy Wall, a tale of courage, hope, and sacrifice, whose echoes still resonate through the corridors of Chinese history, reminding us of the power of words and the undying dream of freedom, and how a wall can become a symbol of an intellectual revolution after the death of the legendary leader Mao Zedong in 1976. A thick cloud that had hung over China for many decades dissipated, carrying with it years of turmoil and isolation. The country groaned under the weight of 10 years of social and political chaos and unrest, left by the devastating Cultural Revolution, leaving deep scars in the souls of millions, and an exhausted economy and a fractured society. With the arrest of the Gang of Four, who were accused of being behind many of the revolution's excesses, a significant political vacuum began to emerge, opening the door to new forces and different visions for China's future. In this volatile climate, Deng Xiaoping rose to power, bringing with him a pragmatic and practical vision for China, based on what he called the four modernizations: agriculture, industry, defense, and science and technology. Deng fully understood that China desperately needed radical reforms to lift it from its economic stagnation and international isolation, and he was prepared for some openness, but within strict limits set by the Communist Party, with the aim of maintaining the stability and cohesion of power, and avoiding a repeat of past chaos in this changing climate, characterized by anticipation and cautious hope. Faint voices began to emerge, then quickly grew louder, demanding more. People were tired of empty slogans and false promises that had brought them nothing but suffering and poverty. They had lived through decades of political repression and strict social restrictions, and had seen their country fall behind the pace of global progress, while other nations flourished and advanced rapidly. There was a deep desire for change, to express themselves freely, and to genuinely participate in building a better future, a future that would guarantee them dignity, justice, and prosperity. This yearning for freedom and democracy, which was brewing in the depths of Chinese society, found a place on an ordinary wall on Zaidan Street in Beijing, becoming a symbol of an unexpected popular awakening and the beginning of a story that would change the face of Chinese history, albeit for a brief period, but one that would leave an indelible mark in late 1978. Specifically on the 19th of November, the first large poster appeared on a wall near the bustling Zaidan intersection in Beijing. This wall had no historical or architectural significance. It was part of a bus station, passed by tens of thousands of people daily, including workers, students, employees, and vendors, making it an ideal location for a message its authors wanted to reach the largest possible number of people. This silent wall quickly transformed into a giant canvas, teeming with words and ideas, becoming a mirror reflecting the hopes, dreams, and fears of the Chinese people. People began to call it the Democracy Wall, a name that stuck, becoming a global symbol for expressing public opinion in the face of oppressive regimes, and a living example of the power of the written word to inspire change, even under the most repressive conditions, confirming that ideas cannot be imprisoned. These posters, or Dazi Bao, were a traditional Chinese means of expression, used throughout history for announcements, propaganda, and even political and social criticism. But this time, it was completely different from anything that preceded it. They were not just repetitive party slogans or praise for leaders, but cries from the heart, expressing personal grievances, harsh experiences during the cultural revel, and bold ideas demanding radical and comprehensive reform. They spoke of fundamental human rights, freedom of expression, and the urgent need for a more just and transparent political system, a system that respects the individual, preserves their dignity, and allows for genuine participation in building the nation. People gathered around the wall, reading the posters with passion and eagerness, and discussing their content with unprecedented enthusiasm. In a scene Beijing had not witnessed for decades, the place transformed into an open forum, akin to an ancient Greek agora, where ideas were freely exchanged. Heated discussions arose, and independent newspapers and magazines that published these bold ideas were sold, reaching the widest possible segment of an audience hungry for truth and knowledge. The wall was teeming with life, and with voices that had long been silenced, thus becoming a beacon of hope in the heart of the Chinese capital, a refuge for anyone seeking an outlet to express their opinion, and a living embodiment of the saying that the pen is mightier than the sword. Among the many voices that resonated from the Democracy Wall, a young and bold voice emerged, one that had a profound impact throughout China and beyond, becoming a symbol of the entire movement. This was the voice of Wei Jingsheng, the simple electrician who worked at the Beijing Zoo, but who possessed a sharp mind, a fearless revolutionary spirit, and a heart beating with a love for freedom and justice. On the 5th of December, 1978, Wei Jingsheng published his famous poster with a title that would forever be etched in the memory of history, echoing in every discussion about democracy in China. The fifth modernization, democracy. This poster was not just an ordinary piece of paper on a wall. It was an intellectual bomb that shook the foundations of the Chinese system, exposing its fundamental contradictions to the public. At a time when Deng Xiaoping was promoting the four modernizations, economic reforms focusing on agriculture, industry, defense, and science and technology as the sole path to China's revival, Wei Jingsheng argued forcefully and convincingly that these modernizations would remain incomplete, indeed doomed to failure, unless the fifth modernization, democracy, was achieved. Wei Jingsheng believed that economic modernization alone was insufficient to build a strong, prosperous, and stable nation. It must be accompanied by genuine political modernization that guarantees the people their fundamental rights and freedoms, grants them the ability to participate in decision-making, holds officials accountable, and prevents tyranny. In his historic poster, Wei Jingsheng stated, in words that still resonate today and summarize the essence of the movement's demands, what is true democracy? It is when the people, by their free will, have the right to choose representatives to manage their affairs, and when they enjoy freedom of thought and expression, freedom of criticism, and participation in all aspects of political and social life. He strongly criticized the idea of a great leader, a clear reference to Mao Zedong, and warned against the emergence of new dictators. emphasizing that the people were the masters of their destiny, not any leader or party, no matter how high their status or how wise they claim to be, and that true power must belong to the people. Wei Jingsheng's words were a powerful echo of what many intellectuals, workers, and students who had suffered the ravages of the Cultural Revolution were thinking. He expressed the essence of popular demands and gave voice to the deep desire for radical change, not only in Beijing but in other Chinese cities, where similar democracy walls began to appear, carrying the same message. His poster, "The Fifth Modernization," became a symbol of the movement and a catalyst for further discussions and demands for democracy, transforming into an enduring historical document, reminding future generations of the importance of freedom. Wei Jingsheng showed rare courage in challenging authority, placing himself in direct confrontation with a regime that tolerated no opposition, fully aware of the heavy price he might pay for his freedom of expression, a price he indeed paid with many years behind bars, thus becoming a martyr for freedom's democracy. Will continue to flourish for several months, transforming into a vibrant center for intellectual and political life in Beijing, and indeed throughout China. Crowds grew day by day, coming from all corners of the country, from distant cities and villages, to read, discuss, and participate in this unique movement. It was not limited to handwritten posters. It extended to include impromptu artistic performances, poetry readings, and the sale of independent books and magazines that published bold ideas different from the official party line. These publications, -1 as Today magazine and April 5th Forum, served as outlets for expressing views that had no place in official media, and a means of spreading awareness among the masses, uniting the ranks of those demanding change. This period, which some called the Beijing Spring, was a true breath of fresh air for the Chinese people after long decades of political repression and intellectual stagnation. People felt they had a voice, that their ideas could be heard, and that they were not alone in their yearning for change. There was a spirit of optimism and hope fluttering in the air, a belief in the possibility of achieving real and peaceful change, and building a new China that was more open and just. The movement demonstrated the power of popular criticism in challenging authority, and proved that the desire for freedom and democracy is deeply rooted in people's hearts, and that it cannot die, even under the most repressive conditions. Rather, it remains dormant, waiting for the opportunity to bloom, like seeds waiting for rain to grow. Initially, Deng Xiaoping seemed to tolerate the movement, perhaps even indirectly encouraging it, using it in his power struggle with his political rivals, especially Huo Feng, who was seen as Mao's successor. Deng might have seen the democracy wall as a means to strengthen his position, direct public anger towards past mistakes, and justify his economic reforms aimed at modernizing the country and raising the living standards of the people. However, as the demands intensified and the boldness of the posters increased, some of which began to criticize Deng himself and demand radical political changes that touched the core of the party's power, he realized that things were getting out of control. Deng was not prepared to relinquish the Communist Party's grip on power, or to allow any real challenge to its absolute dominance. He believed that political stability was the key to economic development, and that any unrest could lead to chaos that would threaten his entire reform project, and even the unity and cohesion of the country. Therefore, it was necessary to put an end to this openness, no matter the human cost, to maintain what he considered order. Beijing's spring did not last long. The cold winds of winter quickly arrived, freezing the flowers of hope that had bloomed on the democracy wall. In March of 1979, Deng Xiaoping issued what became known as the Four Cardinal Principles. These principles served as a red line that could not be crossed, and a clear indication that the regime would not tolerate any challenge to its absolute authority. These principles, which stipulated adherence to the socialist road, the democratic dictatorship of the people, the leadership of the Communist Party, and Marxism-Leninism and Mao Zedong thought, were a clear declaration of the end of the grace period and the beginning of a new phase of organized repression without mercy. On the 29th of March, 1979, Wei Jingsheng, the author of the Fifth Modernization, who had become a symbol of the movement and its most prominent voice, was arrested. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison, in a swift and unfair trial, sending a clear and harsh message to anyone who dared to challenge authority or demand democracy. This was the fatal blow to the movement, which thus lost one of its most prominent and boldest voices. By the end of 1979, the democracy war was moved from its vital location in Zaidan to the isolated Yutong Park, where only a few people saw it, and then it was completely banned later. The posters were removed, and the curtain fell on this short chapter of political openness, to be replaced by a deafening silence, and only one voice, the voice of the party, which reasserted its complete control over the political and media landscape, and tightened its grip on all avenues of expression. Suppression was harsh and swift, but it was carefully calculated and planned. Deng Xiaoping showed the world that economic modernization could go hand in hand with strict political control, and that the Communist Party would not relinquish its power, no matter the human cost. It was a clear message that any attempt to challenge this authority would be met with an iron fist, and that political stability, from the party's perspective, was more important than any demands for freedom or democracy, which could threaten the country's unity and cohesion. The democracy war revealed the deep tension between reform and control in China, a tension that would continue to haunt the country for decades to come, manifesting in later, more tragic events, such as the Tiananmen Square protests in 1989, which were a painful echo of what happened at the Democracy Wall, and a confirmation that the struggle between freedom and power continues, and, at the price of freedom is very high. Despite its brutal suppression, the Democracy Wall movement was not in vain. It left a deep imprint on the Chinese consciousness, and inspired generations of dissidents and activists who carried the torch of freedom. Wei Jingsheng and his comrades. It showed that the desire for freedom and democracy cannot be completely suppressed, and that it will continue to appear in different forms at different times, like fire under ashes, waiting for the opportunity to ignite again, to illuminate the paths of future generations. Wei Jingsheng, who spent many years in prison, was a symbol of this resistance, and his voice continued to echo through the corridors of history, reminding everyone that there are those who dare to dream of a better future, and that sacrifice for principles is not in vain, but will bear fruit one day. Democracy Wall served as a painful reminder of unfulfilled democratic aspirations in China. It revealed the nature of a system that prioritizes stability and control at the expense of individual freedom and political expression, and views any openness as a threat to its existence and authority. But at the same time, it demonstrated the power of words, the power of expression, and the power of individuals who dare to challenge the status quo, even if the cost is high, even if it costs them their freedom and their lives. The wall became a global symbol of peaceful resistance, and an example that the voice of the people, even if silenced for a period, will eventually find its way to be heard, and that ideas cannot be imprisoned or executed. Rather, they pass from generation to generation, igniting the spark of change. The democracy wall no longer exists in its original location, but its memory remains alive in the hearts and minds of many, not only in China, but everywhere around the world where people yearn for freedom. It represents a pivotal moment in China's history, a moment when people dared to dream of a different future, a future dominated by freedom, justice, and genuine participation. Beijing's spring was short, but it was a true spring, in which the seeds of freedom bloomed, even if they quickly withered under the weight of suppression. The democracy wall remains a testament to the fact that the spirit of the search for freedom does not die, and that it will continue to inspire future generations in their pursuit of a more just and democratic future. This is the story of a wall, the story of a people, and the story of a dream not yet fulfilled, but never forgotten. And it will continue to remind us that the voice of the people, no matter how much they try to silence it, will find its way to be heard in the end, and that the flame of freedom, even if it flickers, will never be extinguished. This is the story of the democracy wall, a story worth telling and worth hearing, to remain a beacon for future generations in their pursuit of a better world, a world where the values of freedom, justice, and human dignity prevail, and where the dreams of peoples to determine their own destiny are realized.